It was a hot, humid day in Florida. The kind of day where the air clings to your skin, sticky and suffocating. The moment I stepped out of my car, it felt as though the very atmosphere was a blanket, heavy and thick, making each breath feel labored, like I was trying to inhale through a wet cloth. I could already feel the sweat starting to bead on my forehead, but I wasn't here to let a little discomfort stop me. I was here for something bigger, something that had been on my mind for weeks. The kind of thing that gnaws at you when you hear the rumors, but can't resist the temptation to find out for yourself. I was driving down an old, narrow road, the kind that winds through the heart of nowhere. The pavement was cracked, barely visible through the overgrown grass that seemed to reclaim it, inch by inch, year after year. Tall trees on either side loomed like silent sentinels, their twisted branches hanging low, creating a canopy that barely allowed the sunlight to break through. The kind of road that makes you wonder why anyone would want to travel down it, much less live near it. Yet here I was, heading straight into the heart of the Everglades. The car's GPS flickered, the no signal warning flashing repeatedly, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I was deep into uncharted territory. No cell service, no navigation, just me, the road, and the stories I had heard. Everyone around here knew the tales, the whispers, the warnings passed from one person to another, from one generation to the next. The locals, the ones who had lived here for decades, would always say the same thing when they caught wind of someone heading toward the swamp. Don't go near it. It's cursed. They weren't just talking about a haunted house or some spooky old shack. They were talking about an entire town, a place that had once been full of life and activity, but that had been swallowed by the swamp years ago. It was said to be a place where no one dared to venture. The stories varied, but the one thing they all agreed on was this: the town was cursed, and worse, there were still people who believed they could hear the cries of those who had drowned when the waters swallowed everything whole. Cursed, I muttered to myself, the word almost mocking me as I pushed the gas pedal harder. I didn't believe in curses, not really. Ghosts maybe, but curses? That was just old folklore, something to scare the kids into staying away from places they shouldn't go. But what made this story so intriguing was that it wasn't just a ghost story. This town had been a real place, with real people who once lived there, and now it was gone, buried beneath the swamp like a secret that refused to stay hidden. A ghost town, they called it. But there were more stories, too. Whispers of strange occurrences, people who had ventured into the swamp and never returned, or those who came back, changed. The ones who spoke of the drowned town often spoke in hushed tones, as if even saying its name could awaken something that should remain asleep. I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know what I expected to find. But something deep inside told me that if I didn't make the trip, I would regret it forever. It was the kind of pull that grabs hold of you in ways you can't explain, a need to understand, to uncover the truth. I wasn't sure what that truth would be, but I couldn't stop myself from going after it. The old town, Lost Haven, that's what the stories called it, had vanished beneath the waters many years ago, swallowed whole by the swamp. They said it was a place of prosperity once, a small community that thrived, where people had worked and lived their lives just like any other town, until the floodwaters came. The disaster was so sudden, so unexpected, that by the time the authorities could respond, the town had already been consumed. There were no survivors, no trace of anyone left. It was as though the town had never existed. But that was just the beginning. People said that after the flood, the cries began. First, it was soft. Just the faintest sound carried on the wind, something like a scream carried across the water. But when people went to check, there was nothing. Just the usual quiet of the Everglades, broken only by the croak of frogs or the rustle of the wind through the trees. But then the cries became louder, more insistent, echoing across the swamp, like the sound of something desperate, something begging for help. Those who lived nearby spoke of hearing the cries in the dead of night, echoing across the swamp, only to find nothing when they went to investigate. I heard it then, as I drove down the narrow road. At first it was so faint that I thought it was just the wind. But then the cry came again, sharper this time, like someone was calling out from the depths. It sounded like a voice in distress, as if someone was trapped, drowning, calling for help from far beneath the surface. I slowed the car, my grip tightening on the wheel. The sound wasn't coming from a lake or a river. No, there was no body of water nearby. Just swamp. Thick, murky, wetland as far as the eye could see. And yet, there it was. The unmistakable sound of a cry. It sent a chill down my spine. One that was cold enough to make the sweat on my skin feel like ice. My heart thudded harder in my chest, and for a moment, I questioned whether I should turn around, forget everything, and leave. But something held me there, a force stronger than fear. The stories, the mystery, the town that no one spoke about, the town that was never meant to be found again. And that's when it hit me. The town wasn't just a ghost story. It wasn't just a legend. It was real. Something had happened here. Something that went beyond just a flood or a disaster. Something had been buried with the town. Something that still lingered in the air, in the cries that still haunted the swamp. I had come for answers, but now I wasn't sure I was ready for what those answers might be. As night began to settle in, a strange unease crept up my spine. The air, already thick with humidity, seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the swamp bathed in a dim twilight haze. The sounds around me started to shift. What had once been the soft rustling of the trees and the occasional croak of frogs was now something else. It wasn't the wind anymore, nor an animal stirring in the underbrush. The cries began. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, a faint wail on the edge of my hearing. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me, the way it sometimes howls through the branches or ripples across the water. But the cries came again, and this time they were unmistakable. They were not just one voice, not just a solitary scream. It was a chorus, a maddening mix of screams, shouts, and whispers that seemed to float on the air, pulling at something deep within me. The noise wasn't coming from any direction I could identify. It wasn't the wind, and it certainly wasn't an animal. The sound of a town in agony, a town that had never fully left, its sorrow echoing through the swamp like a curse that had been laid upon it. My heart pounded as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to calm myself. The sounds seemed to wrap around the car like they were coming from everywhere at once. It felt as if the air itself had become saturated with them. vibrating with fear and pain. I turned up the volume on the radio, desperate to drown it out. But the cries only grew louder, more insistent. I slammed the radio off in frustration, knowing full well there was no escaping the sound. It wasn't something I could ignore, not now. My gaze darted to the narrow dirt road ahead of me. The GPS was still out of service, and my headlights barely cut through the darkness, illuminating just enough to see the overgrown weeds and thickets that seemed to claim everything in their path. But I knew that road. I had been driving for too long to turn back now. I parked the car near the edge of the dirt road, the tires crunching on the gravel as I slowly came to a stop. The cries continued, growing clearer, sharper. I had no idea what I was expecting to find, but the pull to follow them was undeniable. It was as if the sound was calling to me, reaching deep into my bones, drawing me forward with an intensity that I couldn't explain. The way the cries sounded, each one distinct yet connected, it felt like something ancient, something that had been buried beneath the earth and water, now resurfacing to haunt anyone who dared to listen. I opened the door, stepping out of the car into the sticky warmth of the evening. The swamp around me was thick, with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It smelled like rot. But it was more than that. It was the smell of something forgotten, something that had been buried for far too long. The cries grew louder as I stepped further from the car. The air seemed to thicken with each step, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. There was no wind, no rustling in the trees, just the sound of the cries and the oppressive silence that seemed to have settled over everything else. I walked carefully, my shoes sinking slightly in the wet earth as I made my way down the dirt path. It was barely a path. Really, just a trail that had long since been abandoned by anyone who would have used it. The further I walked, the more the air around me seemed to change. It was as though the world had grown quieter, but the cries had only grown louder, more defined. They weren't just disembodied voices anymore. They were people, real voices, pleading, crying out for something, for help. And yet, when I tried to pinpoint their source, the swamp seemed to swallow them up. They didn't come from any one place. They were everywhere and nowhere at once. That's when I saw it. An old, rotting sign barely hanging from a rusted post, its wood cracked and peeling, the letters faded by years of neglect. It looked as though it hadn't been touched in decades, but the name was clear enough. Welcome to Lost Haven. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Lost Haven. The name echoed in my mind, and for a brief moment, I wondered if I had somehow stumbled into something far darker than I had intended. This was it. This was the place. The forgotten town. The one buried beneath the swamp, where the cries had been said to come from. There it was. A ghost town now. Its very name a shadow of what it once was. The houses were little more than skeletal remains, the remnants of a life long gone. Their frames were half submerged in the muck, eaten away by the swamp that had taken it all. A few broken windows and decaying door frames were all that remained of what had once been homes. The land had reclaimed it all, swallowing the buildings, the people, and their memories. But the cries, they didn't stop. They were louder now, closer, as if they were coming from the very ground beneath my feet. Each step I took, the voices seemed to grow, pressing in from all sides. I wasn't alone. As I stepped into the town, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The oppressive silence that had settled around me broken only by the cries, made every step feel heavier. I could almost feel the eyes of those who had lived here, their souls lingering in the air, trapped between the world of the living and the dead. The land seemed to hum with something ancient, as if the town itself had a heartbeat, slow and steady, but ever present. The cries were no longer just sounds in the distance. They were right here, all around me, echoing through the empty streets. I could feel them pressing in on me, tugging at the very fabric of my being, pulling me deeper into the heart of the town. I took another step, and that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. Shadows. Figures moving in and out of the ruined buildings. They weren't like people. Not really. They were blurred shapes, indistinct, as if they were part of the town itself. The longer I looked, the more they seemed to take form. Twisted, half-seen figures, like they were trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. They didn't speak, didn't move, except to drift through the ruins. But I felt them. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. It was as if the town itself had a mind, a consciousness. And I was no longer just an observer. I was part of it now. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The cries were not just from the past. They were from the present. And now, they were calling to me. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, each beat feeling louder than the last. The air around me seemed to grow thick, heavy, as though it were pressing down on me. The cries, the sounds of pain and desperation, had become almost unbearable. They twisted in my mind, pulling at my thoughts, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Each cry seemed to echo from a place both close and far away, like 1,000 voices trapped in an endless loop of torment. They were relentless, insistent, filling every corner of my mind, drowning out everything else. I tried to steady my breath, but the air was suffocating. I turned around, half expecting to find someone behind me, someone who could explain all of this, someone who might offer a rational reason for what was happening. But when I spun around, I was met with nothing. Nothing but the same eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. The trees swayed gently, their branches creaking in the wind, and the faint smell of damp wood lingered in the air, mixing with the earthy scent of decay. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. I stood there, waiting for something to happen, my senses heightened, my mind racing with questions. But then, just beyond the reach of my sight, I saw them. Shapes, figures, moving in the periphery of my vision. At first, they were nothing more than faint shadows, barely perceptible, like dark blotches against the dimming light. They didn't move in a natural way, didn't belong to this world. They drifted, like smoke or mist, almost intangible, but unmistakable. I could feel them, feel their presence, though I couldn't make out any details. It was as if they were watching me. I couldn't say why, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, the fear creeping in with every passing second. My breath hitched in my throat, and my instincts screamed at me to turn away, to run, to leave this place. But I couldn't. I couldn't move. It was as if the very ground beneath me had frozen in time, holding me in place, forcing me to witness whatever horrors were unfolding. The figures remained in the corner of my vision, moving with purpose, but without form. Their outlines blurred and shifted, indistinguishable from the darkened shadows around them. I couldn't see their faces, couldn't hear their voices, but I felt them. It was like an invisible weight pressing down on my chest, a pressure that made it harder to breathe, harder to think. The air felt thick with something ancient, something wrong. And then, without warning, I tried to turn back. I pivoted on my heels, my eyes scanning the path I had taken, desperate to find my car, to find safety. But as I took a step forward, the ground beneath me seemed to shift, to change. The path I had walked down just moments ago now seemed foreign, unfamiliar. The trees, which had once seemed like silent witnesses, now looked distorted, their branches twisted and turned in unnatural ways, curling around each other like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. The roots beneath my feet seemed to move, undulating like serpents beneath the soil, threatening to swallow me whole if I took the wrong step. I took another step, but the ground felt different, softer, almost as though it were sinking beneath me. I felt a strange pull, an oppressive weight, as if the very earth wanted to drag me down into it. My legs trembled, and I had to fight the overwhelming urge to collapse, to fall to my knees. This was no longer the path I had walked in on. It was as if the town itself had shifted, bending reality to its will. I stumbled, my foot catching on an unseen root, and I had to brace myself against a nearby tree to stay upright. The air grew colder, despite the oppressive heat of the swamp, and I could feel the sweat on my skin turning to ice. The cries had stopped. At least they had stopped in the distance. But now they surrounded me. They were all around me, echoing from every direction. No longer whispers on the wind, the voices were now right in my ears. So close I could almost feel their breath on my skin. The cries weren't just desperate anymore. They were frantic, panicked, each one layered on top of the other, like a symphony of anguish. It wasn't just the sound of a single person in distress. It was the collective horror of 1,000 souls, all crying out at once, all trapped in the same never-ending nightmare. And then I heard it. A voice, soft but clear, rising above the others. It wasn't a cry for help or a scream of pain. It was my name. You shouldn't have come. A voice was so clear, so real, that it sent a shock through my body. My heart skipped a beat, and I whirled around, expecting to see someone standing there, someone who could explain all of this. But again, there was nothing, no one. The only thing that remained was the oppressive silence, broken only by the low hum of the swamp and the faint rustling of the leaves in the trees. I was completely alone, and yet the voice had been so real, so distinct. I could feel it in my bones. You shouldn't have come here, the voice whispered again, louder this time. And this time, I felt it reverberate in my chest, like it was coming from inside me. It was as if the land itself was speaking to me, pulling at the very fabric of my being. I stumbled backward, panic rising in my chest. My breath came faster now, shallow and quick. I had to leave. I couldn't stay here any longer. This was no longer just a ghost town. It was something far worse, something that had been waiting for me. I turned, but the path was no longer a path. The trees loomed closer, their twisted branches hanging low, blocking the way. The ground beneath me seemed to shift again, the dirt rising up like an old hand, grabbing at my ankles, pulling me back. I fought to free myself, but it was no use. I was stuck. The voice spoke again, but this time it wasn't a whisper. It was loud, full of rage and sorrow. You cannot leave. The trees shook, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to vibrate with the power of the voice. I could feel it deep in my chest, in my bones, as if the very town was alive, breathing with me, moving with me. I could hear the cries again, not distant anymore, but all around me, filling my ears, my head. They were so loud, so overwhelming, I could hardly think. My mind was spinning, consumed by the noise, the voices, the feeling of being surrounded by something that wasn't human, something ancient, something that had been waiting for me to arrive. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And in that moment, I knew it. Whatever this place was, whatever had happened here, it wasn't over. It wasn't finished. The town wasn't abandoned. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. Waiting for me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Slow, dragging, like someone who had been walking for years, never stopping. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Out of the fog emerged an old man, bent over, his face hidden beneath a tattered hat. His clothes were old, worn, like they'd been buried for decades. "Looking for answers, boy," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "You won't find what you're looking for here. You'll hear them, the cries, but you won't see them. Not until it's too late." I wanted to ask him who they were, but the words caught in my throat. He wasn't moving, just standing there, like he was part of the swamp. His eyes, when they finally met mine, were black as night. There was no white, no color, just black holes swallowing everything they looked at. "The town was cursed," he said, his voice almost a whisper now. "They drowned. They all drowned." He looked at me with a twisted grin. "And now, they wait for you to join them." Suddenly, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of slow, dragging footsteps. They echoed through the air, each step heavy, deliberate, as though the person making them had been walking for years, never stopping. The footsteps grew louder, and for a moment, I thought I might be imagining it, but the sound persisted. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The cries of the town seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the slow rhythm of those steps, a pulse that seemed to resonate through the very ground beneath my feet. I turned my head slowly, my body rigid with fear, trying to locate the source of the sound. And then, out of the fog, something emerged. At first it was just a shadow, something indistinct, something that barely seemed to belong to the world I knew. But as it drew closer, the details became clearer. It was an old man. He was bent over, his back hunched as though carrying the weight of countless years. His clothes were worn, tattered, the fabric hanging loosely from his thin frame, as though they had been buried for decades, forgotten by time. His shoes were cracked, the soles barely intact. The smell of dampness clung to him, a mix of decay and rot that matched the air around me. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a tattered hat, casting a shadow over his features. But there was something about the way he moved that sent chills down my spine. His gait was slow, dragging, as if every step required an immense effort, as if he was fighting against forces far older than him. His arms hung loosely by his sides, and there was no hurry in his movement. He was a part of the swamp, a relic of the land, something that had been here long before I arrived, and would remain long after I was gone. As he came into view, he stopped. His head turned slowly, and I felt his eyes fall upon me. I wanted to speak, to ask him what he was doing here, what he knew about the town, about the cries, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stand there, watching him as he watched me, his eyes never leaving mine. "Looking for answers, boy?" The old man's voice rasped, breaking the silence. It sounded like gravel, rough and uneven, the sound of something ancient, as though he had not spoken in years, or perhaps decades. His words were slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I nodded, though I was unsure of what to say. I was desperate for answers, but something about this man, the way he stood there, almost like a ghost, a part of the very swamp, made my words die in my mouth. "You won't find what you're looking for here," he continued, his voice now tinged with a dark amusement. "You'll hear them, the cries, but you won't see them, not until it's too late." I wanted to ask him who they were, who these voices belonged to, but the question stuck in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to speak. The weight of his presence, the oppressive atmosphere of the swamp, and the cries that still echoed in my mind, it all felt too much. His eyes, when they finally met mine, were not like any eyes I had ever seen. There was no color, no white, no blue, no brown. His eyes were black, dark as midnight, blacker than the shadows that clung to the swamp. They were like holes, empty voids that seemed to swallow everything they looked at, pulling the very light out of the world around him. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was staring into something that shouldn't exist, something so old and so evil that it defied all logic, all understanding. His eyes bored into me, and I knew in that instant that he was not a man, not really. He was something else, something beyond my comprehension, something that had been here long before I had arrived, and would remain long after I was gone. "The town was cursed," the old man whispered, his voice so quiet now that I had to strain to hear it. His words were slow, deliberate, as if he were carefully choosing each one, like he was reliving something in his mind, something that had happened long ago. "They drowned. They all drowned." His words hit me like a slap. Drowned? The town had drowned? But that didn't make sense. The stories I had heard about the town disappearing, about the cries, had never mentioned anything about drowning. They spoke of a flood, a sudden disaster, but not drowning. Drowning implied that the people had been trapped, helpless, pulled under by something terrible. The old man's lips curled into a twisted grin, one that was barely a smile, more like a grotesque mockery of one. It was as if the very thought of the town's fate amused him. Even after all this time, he looked at me, his eyes still black, still endless, and for the first time, I felt a chill that went deeper than the air around me. It went into my bones, into the very core of my being. "And now," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "they wait for you to join them." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. A cold gust of wind blew through the swamp, sending a shiver down my spine. And for a moment, I thought I might collapse. I was terrified, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. I couldn't look away from those empty, soulless eyes. What do you mean? My voice trembled, but the question had to be asked. I had to know. I needed to know. The old man didn't answer right away. He just stood there, watching me with that twisted grin. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, like something pressing down on my chest. I could feel the weight of it, the gravity of what he was saying, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low, like he was speaking more to himself than to me. They all drowned, the people of the town, the ones who lived here, the ones who belonged here. They're still here, boy, trapped, waiting for someone else to join them. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The air around me felt thicker now, heavier, as though the very swamp was closing in, wrapping around me like a blanket, suffocating me. I could hear the cries again, distant at first, but growing louder with each passing second. They were all around me now, just as the old man had said. The voices of the drowned, the souls of the town, crying out from beneath the earth, from beneath the water, trapped in a never-ending cycle of suffering. The old man didn't move, didn't speak anymore. He just stood there, his twisted grin never leaving his face, his eyes black and endless, watching me as I tried to make sense of everything he had said. But I couldn't. It didn't make sense. The town had been swallowed by the swamp, yes, but the people, the ones who lived here, they were still here waiting for someone to join them, waiting for me. And that realization hit me harder than anything else. The town was not abandoned. It was not gone. It was still here, hidden beneath the swamp, beneath the cries. And I was in the middle of it. The old man's grin faded, and he turned, his slow, dragging footsteps resuming. Without another word, he walked into the fog, disappearing as silently as he had appeared. I stood there, frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. The cries had stopped for a moment, but I knew they were still waiting for me to join them. I backed away, my legs shaking beneath me, threatening to give out at any moment. My heart pounded against my ribcage, as though it was trying to escape. Every step I took backward felt like a battle, a desperate attempt to flee, but something kept me rooted to this cursed place. The man, his grin, never wavered. He didn't move a muscle. He just kept staring at me, his eyes like endless pits of blackness, swallowing everything in their gaze. With every step I took, his grin widened, as though he found my fear amusing. The twisted joy in his expression made my stomach churn, and I felt bile rise in my throat. The air around me grew colder, sharper. I could feel it. It wasn't just the temperature, it was something else, something suffocating. The cries that had been distant, a low whisper in the back of my mind, now became a cacophony, an overwhelming symphony of screams and wails that filled the air. The sound rose in pitch, louder and louder until it was unbearable. The cries were everywhere, echoing from all around me, from beneath the ground, from the water, from the trees. It was as if the very earth had come alive, as if the swamp itself was crying out in agony. I wanted to run. I had to run. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to get away, to leave this cursed town, to escape the nightmare that was unfolding around me. But when I turned to flee, I heard something in the swamp stir. At first, it was just a ripple, a subtle movement in the water. But then the sound grew louder. The surface of the water began to bubble, and I saw it, something rising from the depths. Figures. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, that the fear had finally taken hold and twisted everything around me. But then the shapes emerged fully from the water, and I knew with a sickening certainty that this was no hallucination. These were the drowned ones, the lost souls of the town that had been swallowed by the swamp so long ago. The figures were soaked, dripping with black, viscous water that seemed to cling to them like a second skin. Their bodies were pale, almost translucent, as if the water had drained the life from them, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. Their faces were contorted, their features twisted and grotesque, frozen in expressions of horror and despair. But the most terrifying part of all was their eyes, or rather the lack of eyes. Where their eyes should have been, there were only empty sockets, dark, hollow, and bottomless, like gaping wounds that would never heal. It felt as though their empty gaze was boring into me, through me, seeing straight into the deepest recesses of my soul. Their mouths hung open, but no sound came out. Instead, there was a deep, guttural gurgle, a sound like water rushing through a flooded drain, like something ancient and unnatural rising from the depths of the earth. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble as the figures slowly began to move, dragging their wet, lifeless limbs through the murky water. Their hands, pale and bloated, reached out toward me, their fingers twitching, like they were trying to grasp onto anything, me, anything, to pull them back into the world of the living. The sound of their movements was chilling, like the soft slosh of water moving against the shore. But there was something far more terrifying about it, something more sinister. It was the sound of something long forgotten, something that had been buried, drowned, and left to fester beneath the earth. And now, it was awake. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My legs were weak, like they were no longer my own. My body moving on instinct as I tried to escape the nightmare that had come to life around me. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I couldn't stop. The path before me seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and turning like a maze. The trees on either side bending in on themselves, as though they were closing in, trapping me. The ground was uneven, slippery, with the wetness of the swamp, and each step I took felt like it might be my last. But no matter how fast I ran, no matter how hard I pushed myself, I could feel them getting closer. The sound of their dragging footsteps, the gurgling moans, grew louder and louder in my ears. It was as though the very swamp itself was alive, shifting beneath my feet, pulling me back, urging me to stay, to join them. The cold, wet hands of the drowned ones brushed against my skin, their fingers like ice, sending waves of nausea through me. I could hear them now, whispering, moaning in that strange, guttural language. It wasn't words I understood, but the meaning was clear. They were calling me, begging me to stay. I stumbled, nearly tripping on a hidden root, but I forced myself forward. There was no time to think, no time to look behind me. All that mattered was moving, running, getting away. The cries were deafening now, as if the entire town, every soul that had been lost here, was calling to me, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. I could feel them, feel their presence, their eyes, even though I could not see them. Their cold, wet hands reached for me from the dark, from the corners of my mind, from the corners of the swamp itself. But then, just as I thought I couldn't go any further, just as I felt my body giving up, I tripped. My foot caught on something hidden beneath the overgrown weeds, and I fell hard to the ground, the impact sending a sharp pain up my arm. For a moment, everything went still. My heart raced in my chest, and I lay there panting, too scared to move, too afraid to get up. I could feel the coldness of the swamp seeping into my bones, my body trembling from more than just fear. The cries had stopped, or at least they seemed to fade into the distance, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I had escaped. But when I looked up, everything had changed. The figures were gone. The cries had vanished. The swamp was still, silent, as if nothing had ever happened. It was as though the very town had swallowed them up again, as if they had never existed in the first place. The path that had twisted and turned like a maze was now a straight line, clear and open. The trees no longer loomed over me like twisted monsters. They stood still, motionless, as if frozen in time. I rubbed my eyes, my head spinning with confusion. Had it all been a hallucination? Had my fear taken over, making me see things that weren't really there? But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't over. I had only just begun to understand the horrors that this place held, the forces that had been unleashed when I stepped into the swamp. As I stood up, brushing the dirt and mud from my clothes, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still there, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The drowned ones were still here, still waiting for me to join them, to become one of them. The town hadn't let me go. It never would. And as I turned to leave, the last whispers of the drowned ones filled the air once again, their voices wrapping around me like chains. I knew then that I had not escaped them. I had only just begun to hear their cries. I made it back to my car, my heart hammering in my chest, every beat echoing like a drum in my ears. My breath was shallow, ragged, and each inhale felt like I was sucking in the very air of the swamp, thick and damp, heavy with the weight of what I had just experienced. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that sent a shiver down my spine, and I quickly started the engine. The car rumbled to life, the sound of it somehow grounding me, pulling me back into the reality I was desperate to escape. But even as the engine hummed beneath me, the horrors of Lost Haven still clung to my skin, wrapping themselves around me like a second skin. I could still feel them, the drowned ones, their cold, empty eyes following me, their cries lingering in my ears. The swamp, now eerily quiet, seemed to hold its breath. There were no more whispers, no more footsteps dragging through the wet earth. The oppressive weight of the place was gone, but something in the air remained. Something dark, something alive. I didn't care how it ended. I didn't care about the answers. I didn't care about what had happened in that town. I just wanted to get out of there. I slammed the car into gear and sped down the narrow dirt road, the tires kicking up gravel as the car lurched forward. The swamp was a blur outside my window, a dark expanse of trees and water fading in my rearview mirror. The sun was just beginning to rise, its pale light creeping over the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the land. It should have been beautiful. The kind of dawn that promised a fresh start, a new day, a new beginning. But it wasn't. It didn't feel like a new day. It didn't feel like anything had changed. I kept my eyes glued to the road ahead, my grip on the steering wheel tight, knuckles white from the pressure. My mind raced, spinning with thoughts that didn't make sense. Had I imagined everything? Was it the isolation and fear that had made me see things, hear things that weren't real? I tried to tell myself it was, that I had just stumbled into a nightmare, that the figures, the cries, the old man, none of it had been real. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. I had felt their presence. I had heard their voices. I had seen them, the drowned ones, and I would never forget their eyes, black as night, swallowing everything in their path. The car sped down the road, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't truly alone, that they were still there, following me. The silence around me was so thick, so suffocating. It felt as though the swamp was closing in once again, like a hand reaching for me, pulling me back to where I had just escaped. And then I saw it, a shadow. At first, it was just a flicker in the corner of my vision. Something moving across the surface of the water, just beyond the tree line. But when I looked again, it was unmistakable. A dark figure, drifting slowly, impossibly, over the water. It was as if it was floating, gliding just above the surface, without making a sound. It moved with purpose, with intent, but there was no clear shape to it. Just a shadow, a presence that didn't belong. I froze, my foot still on the gas pedal, but my mind racing. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't want to know. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and for a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But when I looked again, the shadow was still there, moving across the water, following me as I sped down the road. A cold shiver crawled up my spine, and I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was choking on the very air around me, suffocating under the weight of something that had been with me from the moment I stepped into that cursed town. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly, I thought my fingers might snap off. The shadow lingered in the mirror, growing closer, its shape more defined. It wasn't loud at first. It was soft, almost drowned out by the sound of the engine. But it was unmistakable. It was a voice, a cry of pain, of sorrow, rising from the depths of the swamp, from somewhere far behind me. The sound seemed to pierce the silence, slicing through the air like a knife. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the cry grew louder, more desperate, more filled with anguish than anything I had ever heard. It was as if the voice came from the very soul of the swamp, from the land itself, reaching out to me, calling me back, pulling me toward it. I slammed my foot harder on the gas, my heart racing as I tried to outrun the sound. But no matter how fast I drove, the cry followed me, echoing in my mind, in my ears, in my very bones. It was relentless, a voice from the past, from the town that had been lost beneath the water, from the drowned souls that had never left, that would never leave. My eyes were glued to the road now, my vision blurring, the tears that had welled up in my eyes from fear and exhaustion threatening to spill over. I couldn't look back. I couldn't let myself stop. I had to keep moving. I had to escape. But as I drove, the cry didn't fade. It only grew louder, until it was the only thing I could hear, the only thing that mattered. It was as if the sound had become a part of me, filling my head, drowning out everything else. The cries of the drowned ones, the lost souls of Lost Haven, calling to me, waiting for me. My breath was ragged now, each gasp feeling like it might be my last. My vision swam as the tears blurred everything in front of me, and I pressed on the accelerator even harder, as if that might somehow push the sound away, push the darkness away. The road stretched on endlessly, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be gone from here. But the cry didn't stop. It was there, in the back of my mind, no matter how far I drove. The shadow, the figures, the whispers, they all lingered, like ghosts in the rear-view mirror, always behind me, always waiting. And then, as I reached the edge of the swamp, the cry reached its crescendo, a wail so loud, so filled with raw, primal anguish, that I almost swerved off the road in sheer terror. It was a cry of death, a cry of longing, of something that would never find peace. That's when I knew. I wasn't escaping. I would never escape. The town, the swamp, the cries, they would always follow me. They would haunt me, day and night, because I had heard them. I had heard the last cry, the one that would never let me go. The cries of the sunken town isn't just a story. It's a warning. No one who ventures into Lost Haven ever leaves unchanged. The cries will follow you. The drowned ones will find you. And when the sun sets over the Everglades, they will begin again, waiting for the next soul to join them. And as I looked into the rearview mirror one last time, I saw something I could never explain. The shadow, the figure, was no longer just a shadow. It was a face, pale, twisted, and contorted in a silent scream. And it was staring back at me. The last cry. A cry that would haunt me forever.